Commission responsibilities and expectations are outlined in the interim shop guidelines and the Transportation Asset Management Plan guidelines as adopted by the Commission at its June 2017 meeting. It is the Commission's responsibility to annually evaluate the effectiveness of Caltrans in reducing deferred maintenance and improving state highway conditions, as demonstrated by the progress made by achievement of performance targets. Thank you in advance for your participation in this shop hearing. It is of great value to the Commission in carrying out our responsibility. Chief Deputy Director Mitch Weiss will now have some remarks.
Good morning. When I asked Mr. Gravel what my role was here at the hearing, he said I'm the flight attendant. It's my job to tell you that there are lavatories in that direction. The women's room is this direction. In the event of the emergency, please follow the exit lights.
Awesome. I don't think we need to worry about the unlikely event of a water landing. The hearing will be webcast and will be posted on the Commission's website. The proposed shop, for those of you who don't have this beautiful document, is on the Commission's website. There are speaker cards on the back table. If you wish to speak, you can fill those out and hand those to Doug, who is waving the cards very, very rapidly over his head. Very impressive. And with that, I would turn it back over to the chair.
I'd now like to ask Rick Gravel to come up and give us an overview of the 2018 State Highway Operation and Protection Program, also known as the SHOP, and how it was developed.
Thank you. Rick Gravel with Commission staff. I'd like to give a very brief presentation on or some talking points on the development of the 2018 shop before Caltrans comes up and presents the actual shop, the consistency with the Transportation Asset Management Plan, and a concluding presentation regarding annual performance benchmarks on each of the 4 primary asset classes. I'd like to describe briefly the shop development process. Existing law requires Caltrans to prepare and transmit to the Commission by January 31 of each even year, a proposed 4-year state highway operation and protection program. Before projects can be considered for programming in the shop, they must have completed their preliminary planning phase, also known affectionately as a PID or PSR, which defines the project's purpose and need, as well as a range of alternatives and other performance metrics. Projects proposed in the shop are informed by the rehabilitation needs identified in the 10-year rehabilitation plan, as well as performance targets and objectives in the Transportation Asset Management Plan. At the program level, the total value of the 4-year portfolio of projects and reservations included in the shop are defined in the Commission-adopted fund estimate. Prior to submittal to the Commission, Caltrans is required to make the proposed shop available to transportation planning agencies for an opportunity to review and comment, and includes those comments and the Caltrans response in the proposed shop. Prior to adoption, the Commission reviews the proposed shop for sufficient consistency with the Transportation Asset Management Plan and is also required to hold 2 public hearings. Upon a finding of consistency with the Transportation Asset Management Plan, the Commission adopts the shop and submits the program to the Legislature and the Governor not later than April 1 of each even year. The adopted program, which contains project descriptions, budgets, projected milestones, and at least 1 performance metric for each project, becomes the roadmap for the next 2 years. Any significant change to a program shop project after adoption requires Commission approval. As was mentioned, the 2018 shop is linked to the agenda, and the link to the hearing agenda are comments on the proposed 2018 shop. These comments are based on the Commission adopted interim shop guidelines, the conditionally approved TAMP, and the adopted 2018 fund estimate. Now I'd like to introduce Bruce Titera to discuss the proposed 2018 shop.
Thank you, Rick. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for this opportunity to address the first shop hearing. I really enjoyed your reference to the moon landing on that, and I thought, wow, I remember watching the moon landing when I was in, I think it was 6th grade. Yes. So I would like to, and given that, I'd like to point out the investments we're making in the state's transportation system are substantially more than what was made for the moon landing. So that probably wasn't lost on a lot of people when they heard that. So today I'm going to provide an overview of the shop, and I'm going to go into some of the basics. I realize a lot of the people in the audience are very familiar with the shop, and many of those who will watch this. But we also have a lot of new people that are going to be looking at the shop for the first time, given that this is a public hearing, and the importance with SB1 as to what it is that this document and the projects associated with it are going to accomplish. So I'm going to go into some basic information first, and then go into more detail as to what the shop will be doing. After I speak, Mr. Mike Johnson, the state's asset manager, will be addressing some of the details of how this document is consistent with the State Highway System Management Plan and the state's asset management plan. Clicker. I've learned how to use the, there we go. Learned how to use the pointer. That was good. So the basic purpose of the shop is to maintain and preserve the state highway system and its supporting infrastructure through the rehabilitation and reconstruction of the highway system. It's our fix-it first approach, and that's part of the Road Repair and Accountability Act, Senate Bill 1, is focusing on fix-it first. And very importantly, it's the construction capital projects that are being addressed. We have a lot of call for the shop to do other things, but the shop is something that has capital construction projects to fix and preserve the state highway system. It's also utilized to address emergency repairs. California's had an unfortunate experience with that in the past couple of years between our rough winters and the fires we've had. And very importantly, it is in statute that the shop may not add a new traffic lane to the system. That is the quote. SB 1 addresses it, and SB 486 also addresses that. So where we get into issues sometimes is what constitutes a traffic lane, and I'll address that a little bit later on. So the beginning, so I want to back up to what got us going down this road with the asset management and the linking to the shop. MAP 21, the Federal Transportation Bill of 2012, the year 2012, has a national goal to maintain the nation's infrastructure, particularly its highways and bridges, and to require an asset management plan by the states, and that there be performance targets to address what is in that asset management plan, and not associated with it, and not shown on the slide is there are also potentially penalties to states who don't achieve these targets, in that federal funds could be withheld or redirected to other purposes by the federal government. So MAP 21 2012 started us down this path. Senate Bill 486 of the year 2014 picked up where MAP 21 started, and it calls for the state, and Caltrans in the lead role in that, to prepare a robust asset management plan. And robust is a widely used term, and we interpreted it to be at its most in depth, and we really are seeking to prepare a robust asset management plan, digging in deeply, and as you will see with Mike Johnson, what is often characterized as the most advanced asset management plan of any of the state departments of transportation. So the commission in this role of 486 also adopts targets and performance measures for the asset management plan for certain assets that they get to approve. They have to review and approve. They don't have to approve it, but they have to review and comment and hopefully approve the asset management plan, and that will be happening presumably at the March CTC meeting. So the department prepares the projects, and again, it is limited to capital improvements relative to the maintenance, safety, and rehabilitation of the state highway and bridges that do not add a new traffic lane to the system. This is a quote from 486, slightly paraphrased, so it's close. The commission then adopts the shop, and the commission with 486, this is new, that they may decline to adopt the shop if they don't find consistency with the asset management plan. And up up top, I should have started that the robust asset management plan is due no later than the year 2020. It is the year 2018 right now, so we're well ahead of this schedule. We're coming forward with something that's quite impressive early on in this process. So, Senate Bill 1 of 2017. So you can see the progression and the complexity of the legislation and the requirements of the department and the commission and, by extension, our partner agencies as well. Senate Bill 1 brought substantial new revenue to the shop as well as other programs, bringing approximately $1.6 billion to the shop. And that $1.6 billion is particularly targeted to the 4 primary asset classes that are identified in SB 1, which would be pavement, bridge, culverts, and TMS, Transportation Management System elements. And I'll go into a little detail on that later on. And the Commission has adopted targets, and those targets are also set in Senate Bill 1. And I'll address that later. So the SB 1 funding, the department with the projects we're developing are seeking to achieve the SB 1 targets, commission adopted targets, and also the federal performance targets. So we're meeting 3 different purposes with the asset management plan. And while there's a lot of overlap, it's not all exactly the same. The federal targets are addressing the national highway system, and the SB 1 and commission adopted targets are addressing the state highway system. So the national highway system has roadways that are locally owned, that are not on the state system, and we have state highways that are not part of the national highway system. So that there's overlap. Most of the state highway system is in the national highway system, but not all of it. And we have a target date by Senate Bill 1 of 2027 to achieve our performance targets. And these are those performance targets that are set in SB 1. That the pavement be, and I'm using the words from SB 1, it's a little awkward, it's legislation, not less than 98%. Most people don't speak to that. We can achieve 98% in good or fair condition. And then this dash underneath there of the 90% level of service achieved for maintenance of potholes, spalls, and cracks. Senate Bill 1, SB 1, address shop needs and also our maintenance program needs. So the maintenance program also has substantial increase in funding to go out and take care of things that can be dealt with very short time frames to address the needs of the system. So that they are addressing those to get out there as quickly as possible to address these shortcomings. That culverts that not less than 90% are in good or fair. TMS units, also those that are similar. So then we have this interesting thing of fix not less than an additional 500 bridges. And that's 500 bridges beyond what we would normally be doing within the shop. So it adds to that. And that is also to be achieved by the year 2027. So, shop basics for the 2018. What is the 2018 shop doing? It's covering 4 fiscal years, and our fiscal years, for those that are not familiar with that, run from July 1st to June 30th of each year. So 2018, the fiscal year starts on July 1st and ends on June 30th, 2019. So we have 4 consecutive fiscal years, and this is somewhat different from the STIP, that we have these 4-year cycles. It is constrained to the Commission-adopted 2018 fund estimate, and as the Commissioner pointed out, we have nearly $18 billion. This is a substantial amount of money. We recognize this. It is incumbent upon the Department to spend this money wisely to get the best use of it, and we are all in on doing that. It's almost $10 billion more than what, the 2016 shop was almost, I knew I was going to do this in the math side, almost $10 billion, and so you can see that this is adding almost $8 billion more to the shop. That's a lot of revenue to get a lot of achievement out of that. The department has developed the shop to be consistent with the State Highway System Management Plan and with the Transportation Asset Management Plan. So something that's really important is the distinction between an asset, it's a physical, tangible thing like this podium that I can touch, and something that's an objective, and it would be, what comes of that asset being out there, what use. So something that might be an objective would be safety or mobility. It's not a thing that you can go touch and build on, But the building that we do affects that objective, or what you hope the outcome of the facility. Absent the objective, there's no point in having the facility. But the shop has to address the facility itself, not the objective. So it's a little odd, but for things like mobility, where we're fixing an existing asset, we're not adding a new lane to achieve the mobility objective. But by fixing the highway that we have now, you may have improved mobility because the pavement's in better condition. And again, the four primary assets are pavement, bridge, culverts, and TMS elements. Those are, again, specifically called out in SB1. They're consistent with the federal requirements for pavement and bridge. And we are focusing the new $1.6 billion per year of Senate Bill 1 funding on these four primary assets. And so system expansion is not left out of Senate Bill 1 and other programs. They have competitive funding programs, and the Commission will be addressing that at a Commission meeting in March and in May. We have the Interregional Transportation Improvement Program and the regional improvement programs that are under the STIP. We have regional measure dollars that are used to substantially expand the transportation system. And then there are other federal funds such as Surface Transportation Program and CMAQ, the Congestion Air Quality Funds. When these other programs have projects that are on the state highway system, and we also have likely concurrent shop projects, we try to combine these projects for construction so that we go into these some of these corridors and segments to get in, do the work with our partners, or if it's a solo project of the department, get in there once and get out and not come back for years, rather than having a series of projects that would continually inconvenience the public and add cost for both freight and people. And it also puts the highway workers in harm's way if they're out there for a longer period and more occasions. So we are seeking to do that. When we have combined projects that include SHOP and other funding sources, we segregate the costs so that SHOP pays for SHOP and the other programs pay for their part, and those are codified in cooperative agreements and other binding contracts with our partner agencies. So we're very careful to do that, and we don't want to cross over where the SHOP is not meeting its purposes. So there's the O in SHOP, State Highway Operations Preservation Protection Program. So the O is that operations. So people, well, if you're not building any new lanes for highway, well, what are you doing in operations? So there are some limited lanes that can be added. And examples are the truck climbing lanes, where you'll have a steep grade where trucks are going to drive at a substantially slower speed than traffic. And the rationale for having that in the shop is that slow-moving trucks are a potential safety hazard. If they're sitting there in an otherwise fast lane, they also would cause tremendous congestion if we didn't have the additional capacity to move them over and let them drive more slowly. Auxiliary lanes for merging and weaving, where we have interchanges or on-ramps and things like that, it's an eligible use. And it's important that we make a distinction between an auxiliary lane that's for this purpose versus an auxiliary lane that's like 2 or 3 miles long that's achieving a capacity increase. So we watch that and try to keep that distinction clear. Making improvements to intersections, geometric improvements, signals, turn pockets, other things to improve the safety and the operations of those intersections are eligible. Shoulder widenings on roadways where we're not meeting standards or there's a need for that, that's addressed. Two-way left turn lanes, that's a safety issue and also an operational issue. And then, of course, all the TMS elements, which I'd mentioned I'd get back to, which are like the vehicle detections, loop ramps, ramp meters, message signs, traffic counters, all that kind of the electronics and the smart highway. And we'll be seeing more of these kinds of projects in the future as we get towards automated vehicles and the vehicles are talking to the highway system. The shop will participate in that, but then other funding programs will participate in that as well. Programs such as the Congested Corridors Program that the Commission will be addressing and that are specifically called for in the legislation to do that. So what you'll see here is all these other operation needs, and you'll notice that those are not the 4 primary asset classes that the SB1 is addressing. So as we're doing one of those 4 asset classes, and I'll use the example of pavement, we would consider the pavement to be the anchor asset that triggers the need for a project where we need to go out and rehabilitate the to rehabilitate. But as we're doing that, we would also be addressing other needs that would be shop eligible and that are actually needed. So we wind up having a more complicated project than just the plain pavement project. We're also addressing signs that might need replacing, lighting that might be antiquated, the shoulder might need treatment, the guardrails may be in need of replacement. So we go out there and do all this work to go in once and do it right and not have to come back for years. So the shop, that 4-year cycle I mentioned at the beginning of the 2018 and then the 4 years, it moves along in progressions. They have a 2-year overlap as illustrated in the slides. So where we are now with the 2018 is we're in the transition to the full asset management as required by 486 and SB1, where we have the robust asset management plan no later than the 2020 shop. We've got a quasi-robust asset management plan moving forward right now. We have legacy projects that were developed and were conceived and developed in 2013, 2014, 2015 coming through that are still in the pipeline, that are still being built. And they were not determined at that time with that full asset management perspective. We have the 2018 where the new projects coming in do have that asset management perspective. And they come into the later 2 years, as you can see by this illustration, that we carry over projects from the previous shop, the 2016 shop, which also had carryover projects from the 2014 shop. This progresses through time. So that by the time we get to the 2020 shop, we're substantially new projects that were selected and developed based on the asset management plan and the state highway system management plan. And then by the time you get to the 2022 shop, then all of those old projects should be pretty well into the either construction or moving well into that delivery process. So the new projects coming in will be they'll be robustly related to the asset management plan. So the relative spending for the 2018 shop by the categories, you can see here that the 4 primary assets, and we refer to the pavement, bridge, culverts, and TMS elements as the primary assets, that takes up most of the money. The project objectives that I had mentioned earlier, the operations is in there, the safety's in there, the emergency response is in there. There's quite a lot of other projects that get addressed through that, and that's all the traditional shop eligible projects. So SB1 didn't make all that other work go away, but it focuses its new money on the $1.6 billion addressing the primary assets. So we have the other money we've been using on the primary assets and then augmented that with the $1.6 billion. So what the 2018 shop will do, and again, this is a point in time. We're getting down, and for those of you that are engineers, which is most of the people in the room and probably watching, saying that 5,576 lane miles is a pretty precise number. So it's a point in time based on the documents that have been submitted for the 2018 shop. That will vary as we fully develop the projects. It might be 5,577 at a different time on there. So these are approximate numbers. 494 bridges. It'll vary. We did a lot of things we discovered, and this is something we have needs that we don't know we had until we get in there and we start looking. We discovered that what we thought was going to be a simple project on a bridge becomes a much more complex project on a bridge. Same thing with culverts and pavement. So this is the distribution of all the shop projects around the state, and I realize that this looks like a confetti throwing party for New Year's, and I'll go into some detail to show this, and we'll have access to this. So the 4 primary asset classes are listed in the green, red, blue, and orange squares, and then the other what we call supplementary assets, things such as lighting, overhead signs, other things, bike ped facility, that those purple dots are scattered around. And then we have project objectives that would be the safety and mobility projects and such that are also scattered around. So you see the general distribution and large concentration within the major urbanized areas of the state, but then also you can see our major corridors that we have throughout the state that are traveled. And you'll see that there are some areas that don't appear to have a whole lot of projects in them. So one of the things with asset management and the new funding and the requirements of SB 1 and 486 is that our decisions of what projects come in are driven by asset management perspective. The money is not distributed by geographic equity. We don't divide up the money and give each district, you get your share, your share, your share. It's based on the asset needs of the condition of those facilities that they have in their regions. So it winds up creating issues where we have places that have essentially, in some places, almost brand new highways. They haven't triggered the need for asset improvement at this point. They will in the future. As we add HOV lanes through measure projects and other things, those come into the state highway system, and the shop then becomes responsible for maintaining and preserving those facilities, unless they're a toll facility or something like that with a different agreement that dedicates those funds to those purposes. But if it's just a general HOV lane where they're not part of a toll facility, we wind up owning that under the shop in the future to take care of. And then you'll see in some of the, where you'll see parts of the state that are rural where there are very few people living, and you'll see a lot of projects up there. Well, those highways, those primarily two-lane highways, have a lot of wear and tear by trucks, and they don't get as frequent attention as some of the urban areas. And a lot of those are quite a bit older, so their pavement has deteriorated over time. So there's quite a distribution of projects. So for the primary assets, these are the pavement project distributions, again, concentration in the urbanized areas. Bridge projects distributed, again, good distribute, a lot of urbanized areas, and then some, again, concentration in the rural areas where we have a lot of bridges, a lot of creeks. And culverts. We have the culvert inventory. We're still working on identifying all of the culverts in the state. It's important to keep in mind the state highway system is more than 100 years old, and so activities that were done 100 years ago to build a highway and do a culvert, they didn't have computer systems, they didn't have the documents to track where all the things are, and some of those have been buried by landslides and other things. So we're still completing the full inventory of culverts throughout the state, and as we do that, we add them to our work. And then the TMS elements, and not surprisingly, there is a concentration in the urbanized areas, and some rural areas are starting to implement TMS elements as well. So from a regional perspective, to give a closer idea of where those investments are being made for all asset categories, San Diego, LA Basin, the Bay Area, again, you can see following along our major highways. And then the San Joaquin Valley, you can see the Highway 99 corridor has quite a bit of investment, and then up in the northwest portion. So it includes the Sierra foothills and mountain counties as well as the valley counties on that. And with that, I would be happy to take any questions before I hand it over to Mr. Johnson to address asset management.
Any questions for Bruce? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Michael Johnson will now come and talk about and the asset management plan.
Thank you, Commissioner. Pleasure to be here for the first ever shop hearing. I feel we should be signing something or something here. We should. So, what's that? Do a moonwalk. You don't want to see me do a moonwalk, I'm pretty sure of that. But I was thinking when Bruce said that, well, I was 3. He said he was in high school. I don't know. What did he say? I forgot. So,
I was in 6th grade.
6th grade, okay.
But that still makes me feel old.
So, you know, this task that the commission has, and Bruce went over this, you know, they're tasked with, in effect, finding that there is consistency between a project portfolio that is nearly 1,000 projects and a plan that's 180 pages. And when you step back from it and say, how do you do that? What is the mechanism that allows you to provide that consistency? And I think that's where I wanted to go with this presentation. This presentation was queued up for the last commission meeting, so I'm happy to be able to actually present it today. And again, in the commission meeting down in Orange.
Sorry, you have the wrong presentation up on the screen.
Oh. Sorry, I wasn't even looking, the same title. So the consistency comes through the framework that is asset management. And there's a lot of focus on benchmarks, and we're going to talk about benchmarks next. But really, the way that we ensure that the shop has the right projects in it is by following the asset management plan. So I want to start from the highest level. What is an asset management plan? And I highlighted a couple key points. It's a strategic plan, one, to deliver agreed upon standard of service, i.e. targets. So the agreed upon standard of service were established by the Commission when they adopted condition targets for pavement, bridge, culvert, and TMS. So that where we're going to, that service level is set by the Commission. The department's job is to develop an asset management plan, i.e. a strategic plan to get us to those targets. Okay, so that's the AASHTO definition. So how do we do that? Well, this connection is kind of symbiotic in some ways. So the asset management plan provides analysis. This is financial analysis based on targets, looking at deterioration rates, and making projections out into the future of where certain investment levels will get us in terms of system condition. That informs the shop in the form of an investment plan. So we dole out the money in the shop to certain investments in order to hit these objectives. Then the shop executes the asset management plan by putting together a series of projects, in this case almost 1,000 projects, 999 if you're counting, that will affect all of those condition improvements that we need to realize the targets that were set in the asset management plan. So these things are very much joined at the hip. However, the shop is not the only way that the department achieves the asset management plan. We achieve it every time our crews go out and fix the highways or fix bridges. We have crews that paint bridges. Whenever we do highway maintenance, what we call major maintenance work, that has the effect of slowing down deterioration. And so that's all part of the equation. So when you look at the system, it's not a function of a funding program, it's a function of the combined effect of all spending that's happening on the state highway system. Okay, so that's the simple connection. So how do we know this is actually happening? You know, you look at I think Mitch held up the book, it's like 2.5 inches thick. You read through that, you really can't get a good feeling for what this is doing to the system. So I want to walk through the process that the department actually implemented. And it's funny because we are, as was mentioned a couple times, quite a bit ahead of where we're supposed to be honest with you. We were tasked in Senate Bill 46 to produce a plan, i.e. the document, which the Commission adopted at their last meeting. We were required to do that by 2020. We have the plan done. You know, there's some little tweak we're doing for the March meeting, but it's effectively done. And the department has been moving forward almost simultaneously implementing this. So we're getting actually an implementation, as Bruce showed, by 2020, when all we were actually required to do was have a plan by 2020. That's really important, and when we get into the benchmarking, you'll see why that's so important. So we're deliberately pushing the timetable because we want to get past the plan so we can get to the business of actually implementing asset management within the department. So how do we do this? In the asset management plan, both the State Highway System Management Plan and the Transportation Asset Management Plan do the same analysis for the state highway system. We do a gap analysis. So for pavement, we look at the current condition of the pavement. We look at the Commission adopted targets. We find out how much difference there is between those two things. What's the delta? And then we price out what that delta will cost to close. And that's how we come up with the financial estimates and also the amount of money needed for the investment plan. So this is statewide. The Transportation Asset Management Plan identified a statewide need of approximately $86 billion over the same 10-year period. That's a 10-year number. Over the same 10-year period, post SB1, the department has about $46 billion. So we have a little more than half the money needed to address all the needs in the state. That means not everything can get done in a 10-year period, plain and simple. Okay, but SB 1 did tell us, put a lot of focus on the fix-it-first items that Bruce mentioned, and the condition targets command a substantial amount of the SB 1 investment in order to hit those targets. We just have to put it there. If we redirect it to anything else, which is within the prerogative of the commission to do, it will put at risk the ability to achieve those goals. So when we're balancing these things, safety, mobility, condition, and others, we have to continually remind ourselves that, well, if we take from this, we're giving up somewhere else, because the pie is only as big as the pie. And the pie overall is only half enough of what we totally need. So we do this statewide assessment, and we come up with statewide needs that are unconstrained. In other words, they're not bound by what budget we currently have. This is a requirement of the California Government Code to come up with this unconstrained need for the state highway system. But then the reality sets in that you have to constrain that need. And so when you start to impose the fiscal constraint on it, it leads to all this trade-off analysis that you have to do. And after you go through all of that, the result is an investment plan. So both the needs assessment and the investment plan are presented in the California Transportation Asset Management Plan and the State Highway System Management Plan. Coming out of that investment plan, we get two things at a statewide level. It defines, one, what funding is planned for each thing that we're trying to do. So how much are we going to spend on pavement? How much are we going to spend on bridges? How much are we going to spend on safety? And so forth. And then what kind of performance we'd expect from those investment levels. So if we fully invest in a particular attribute, like we did post SB 1 for pavement, bridges, culvert, and TMS, we said we have to hit these objectives in 10 years. In order to do that, we have to spend this much. That, in effect, dictates how much investment has to go to each of those things. Okay, so this is all statewide. This is all what's presented in the asset management plan and the state highway system management plan. So now, how do you operationalize that to get to a point that you're getting projects that you know are feeding into this plan? And that's where I'll walk through that so that the commission will get that understanding and hopefully have that finding of consistency. So when we look at the statewide need and we look at what we're going to invest in each activity, we'll take pavement, for example. That pavement investment will buy us a certain amount of performance. That performance lives in 12 different districts within Caltrans. So we take the expected or the needed performance and we parse it out to the 12 districts. And not all 12 districts are in the same place. Some have a lot less pavement, so their inventory is a lot lower. Some have better pavement than others. Some have certain classes better than other classes. So we take all of that into consideration at a pavement class level, and we look at, in this case, I'm showing one district, how many miles. So this is the Los Angeles district. In total, they have over 4,400 lane miles of Class 1 pavement. So these are interstates, major freight routes. These are our busiest highways, generally speaking, in the state. Of those, there's 250 of those lane miles are currently in good condition. There's 3,700 that are in fair, and there's about 464 that are poor. So that's taking the statewide need down to the Los Angeles area and look at what their condition breakdown is. Every district has a different inventory and a different condition breakdown. Because it's all performance driven, we're looking at where are these big gaps, and we're going to put the investment to close the gaps in proportion to the size of the gap. So if a district, for some reason, didn't have a need in this area, they would get no investment. Okay, that doesn't typically happen with pavement, but there are some other things that For example, a roadside rest, and there are districts that don't have any roadside rest, so they don't get any investment to address roadside rest needs. But in this case, we start off with what their inventory is, what their condition is, and then we look at we look here and we look at what are they already committed to do. In other words, what is the commission already approved in terms of Class 1 pavement? So in this case, when the analysis was done, the commission had already adopted projects that would fix 1,900 lane miles approximately of fair pavement and 336 lane miles of poor pavement. So we deduct that out of the gap. That's already slated to be done in projects previously approved. Okay, then we have to build in the ongoing deterioration that this pavement is expected to experience. And we come up with what we call a remaining performance. In other words, to hit the goals that we have, District 7 has to do a bunch of additional poor pavement lane miles. The number is bigger than where we are today because the pavement continues to deteriorate on an ongoing basis. So this analysis is all done over a 10-year time frame to be consistent with the asset management plan. So we give to the district, for Class 1 pavement, we need you to rehabilitate 759 poor lane miles of pavement over a 10-year period. If you do that, then we will hit the SB1 goals. Okay, so we've taken statewide needs, statewide investment, parsed it down to each of the 12 districts. We've looked at their inventory, their condition, their gaps. We've given them a performance objective, and we've given them what we feel is a appropriate budget to achieve that performance objective. We're pricing these out using statewide average unit prices and statewide average support ratios, looking at 3 prior years of information. So that's the plan that goes to each of the 12 district directors in Caltrans. And their job is to put together a project portfolio that achieves that objective and all the others that we identify. So specifically today, we're talking primarily about pavements, bridges, culverts, and TMS elements. There were specific objectives given to each of them for each of those 4 areas, and there was a budget given for them to achieve the SB1 goals, period. So their job is put together the portfolio. So their portfolio that they put together is a 10-year project portfolio. Caltrans has never had a 10-year project portfolio ever. We have one now. We have plans of what we're going to do. So we have 4 years of the shop. We have the projects in planning after that. And then beyond that, we have projects that are at the conceptual planning stage. They haven't even entered formal planning. We told the districts, define all of those projects and tell us what we're going to get from all of those projects so that we can evaluate over a 10-year period whether you're going to hit the district target. And if you hit the district target and we hit it in 12 districts, we'll hit the state target. So the district's job was to meet the performance goals, stay within their fiscal targets, and balance the plan over the years. In other words, we don't want to have billions one year and then nothing the next year. So we want a relatively steady state plan, or as close as we can get it. So that's their task. In the last year and a half, we've implemented a piece of software that tracks performance at the project level. And this is a screenshot of it. There's a lot going on. It's not important that you read it all. What is important is to understand that in a post-486 world, the department, in our efforts to implement asset management, has implemented a project-level definition of what that project will do. So in this case, this project's doing all of these things. We've got some pavement, we've got some drainage, we've got a little bit of safety and a little bit of mobility. It comes in the form of asphalt pavement. We're doing a bunch of lane miles of fair pavement. We're replacing some culverts. We're doing some lighting rehab. We're doing some overhead sign work. This is a good corridor project. These are the kinds of projects that, from an asset management standpoint, I'm encouraging for a couple of reasons. There is cost effectiveness through economies of scale for a project like this, and projects like this will disrupt the traveling public less than if we tried to do each of these projects in their old silo like we used to do previous to the implementation of asset management. The districts do this. This is one project. This is what it does. They have to do this for a portfolio that covers a 10-year period of time. Then from the headquarters perspective in the asset management units, we have reports that summarize what all of these projects are doing over time, and we compare it against their performance objectives. So here's a pavement class 1 objective. This is what the district submitted. We can look at that. We can see if they're above or below the number, and we can make some decisions. When the district submitted their performance, when they submitted their project portfolio, we ran these performance objective reports, all 12 districts were asked to go change something. And this wasn't a rubber stamp. They submitted it, we reviewed it. There was areas where they were doing more than we asked them to, and there were areas where they were not doing enough, and we sent it back and said, we need you to retool your project portfolio to hit all of these performance objectives. And here are some areas where you did a little more than we asked, so this is where you can find the funds to go do this other work. So again, this is all at a district level. So the district's constrained project portfolios are then aggregated up. So once we've reviewed them and we said, yeah, it looks good, we're hitting the performance, you're within budget, it's relatively balanced, we aggregate all of them up. We review statewide performance to make sure that we're getting what we want to get. In, again, it's a 10-year period worth of time. They're all within the fiscal constraints that we have. Once that all checks out, we effectively have a draft shop. At that point, the work of the districts and the work of the asset management plan, we then kick those lists over to Bruce and his staff, and they go through the actual programming documentation with the district to lead to what you see as a 2018 draft shop. It's this process that gives us the confidence that the projects that we have planned will get us to where we're trying to go. That is how we find the consistency. It's through the process. That's what the definition of asset management is. We have implemented the strategic plan framework. We are targeting commission-adopted performance targets as defined in SB1, but previously adopted by the commission. And we feel confident that we have the right project mix to get to the objectives we're after. So that is really the process that the department's put in place so that when we get a list of 999 projects, we are confident that they're the right projects. There are 4 years of a 10-year plan. So, you're not, in some cases we see certain assets come in early. Generally pavement gets delivered a little bit sooner than we can deliver bridge work. So you see this moving of assets and accomplishments around in time, but our confidence is there that we have the right mix of projects. Now, Bruce mentioned that the set of projects you have is we're in a transition shop, if you will, and that we have, in effect, everything that started new after July of last year in planning is all in accordance with this strategic approach. We have legacy projects still coming forward, so what you get in the 2018 shop is somewhat of a mixed bag of those things. But our confidence is there that when we do hit 2020, not only will we have an approved asset management plan, we'll actually have a portfolio of projects that have already implemented it. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions related to how we are confident that we have this consistency.
Questions for Michael? Michael, walk me through, let's say a project has a PMI index of 50 or something like that. Let's say about more like 30. So we know it's a poor pavement management index, and it's in Del Norte County. And so it has a poor pavement index, but it has 300 car trips per day with that, versus a something that has a pavement management index of 40, but it's in LA and it gets 40,000 cars a day. Was there a weighting factor in how you developed this plan in terms of not just only the condition, but the use? Was that factored into the matrix of how you decided? Because you said you had, the need is almost 50% greater than the funding that we have available.
Yes, it's a great question. So one of the things that we did when we implemented the performance targets, we segregated the classes of routes. Because a class 1 is our interstates, it's our major freight routes. It represents about 50% of all pavement in the state of California. And then we have class 2 and 3, and as you get higher in those numbers, you're getting progressively more rural for the most part. So we set targets, so the commission adopted targets that are more aggressive for class 1 routes than they are for class 2 and 3. So in effect, our target is better on the busier, more heavily traveled freight routes and interstate routes than it is on a rural county road. So, when we develop the plans for each district, we're giving them a performance objective in a class of route. So we've already somewhat constrained where they can work to class 1, 2, or 3, and there's different investment levels in each one. But then on top of that, we're not telling the district what specific routes to go pick. We're simply saying, you need to go get this many poor lane miles and make them good. We're in effect letting that decision happen between the district and our pavement management group, who does a lot of analysis. So they provide them recommendations. The local district and ultimately the district director makes the choices as to what specific routes get the work. That is, in part a function of usage, as you pointed out, but sometimes there's other considerations like partner projects that happen to be going on. So there's an opportunity at a particular point in time, or other things. So, what I'm looking at primarily is that you moved enough poor pavement out of poor on class 1 routes or on class 3 routes.
Was there any consideration as you developed the plan in terms of regional construction capacity? We talked about this a little bit after the January meeting, that we can only fit so much through the pipe.
Yeah.
And if you're going to do $500 million of work in Humboldt County, does Humboldt County, the network of construction and labor and everything that goes into that, does it have the capacity to do $500 million in this short time period, or do we have to be realistic and say we can only do this much work over a 5-year period rather than a 3-year period?
That's another great question. So the short answer is the asset management plan assumes that the construction industry will adapt to the demand. And we've done a number of things to outreach to them to help them understand where the work's coming. One of the things that I mentioned earlier was developing a 10-year set of projects. So we can now go to the construction industry and say, hey, this is where we think we're going to be, not 2 years or 4 years, but where we think we're going to be 6, 8, and even 10 years out.
How's that going so far?
I think we met with them. I would probably defer to our construction folks, but the feedback that I've got is that in some cases, the construction industry, they're aware of SB1, they're waiting to see the bids hitting the street, and they're particularly waiting to see if it sticks before they start staffing up, equipping up. There has been discussions that I've personally had with various construction firms, and they will talk about concerns that they have from a labor availability standpoint. But I think they're they're poised, ready to act, but they want to make sure that the projects hit the street before they start hiring people.
Understood. One last question before we move on to the second half of your presentation. You talked about this process of the asset management process has been one of somewhat of discovery because some of our assets are over 100 years old. And so there's things about the asset, the nuances of the culverts and things like that we're still getting our arms around. Is there an effort to digitize all that so that going forward, we will have, like a GSI of the entire underground network of not only culverts, but all the information systems that are there so that it's a one-stop location of a resource for not only Caltrans and the industry?
Boy, I could have paid you to ask that question, so thank you very much. So a couple of things. One, as the culverts are being inventoried, we're capturing GPS locations of them as well as inventory, material and condition and that sort of thing. That's happening in a culvert management system. We have a pavement management system. We have a bridge management system. We've got an integrated maintenance management system. And one of the initiatives that my team and I are working on is actually develop an enterprise asset management system that brings all these assets together, not only the inventory, what is the condition, pairing it up with the project so that we can see a cause and effect of what needs that we have on the system is every project addressing. So we're working through the approval process with the Department of Technology and others right now, and I expect that you'll probably be hearing more about that as we get to a point where it looks a little closer on the horizon.
Okay, my B side to that question is, if you go to a standard, does that become a standard that then counties and local governments can kind of build on so that when they recognize their underground GSI, it kind of layers on top of each other of the different underground assets?
That's another good question. So I will preach to my staff, we need to build the trunk of the tree before the branches, but we need to think about how broad the branches are going to be when we're building the trunk. So we're looking forward to that, but it's not, we need to stand up the core first, and our core is get what we have and are responsible for in there. Step two, in my mind, would be to let the locals tell us when they're addressing needs through their projects that are on the state highway system, because there's a fair amount of that going on. And then step three might be that broader step. And I think as we get a little bit further through this requirement process, this might be something for the department to have this kind of dialogue with the commission, because the department has, in effect, authority to develop a system for what we would be managing through our asset management efforts. But there is potentially opportunity to look at something broader that could manage the whole system in the state of California. That comes with a lot of additional costs and a lot of additional ongoing support for that. So right now we're just trying to get the trunk built, but as we're doing it, we're looking to not eliminate that possibility in the future.
Is there another state that's already implementing this type of a program?
There's many state DOTs that have this for the state highway system. I'm not aware of one that has it for everything.
Okay. All right. We're joined by Commissioner Medaffer. Do you want to chime in on anything before we move to the next?
Nope, I'm just here to listen and provide comment as necessary.
Okay,
Thank you.
great.
Okay, so at this point, we're going to shift gears on the agenda to benchmark setting. Certainly SB1 has a lot of accountability, and Bruce went through what those specific accountability measures are. The commission has an obligation to make sure that the projects that we're doing are moving us in the right direction. Myself and my team, the entire Caltrans organization is working very diligently to put into place processes and policies that make sure we get to where we're trying to go. So this presentation is really it's intended to give everybody a flavor for what it's like to set these benchmarks and what all is involved. Because I think it's easy to say we want benchmarks, and then if you're actually tasked with having to do that, it's a little bit of a challenge. So let me walk through why it's a challenge. So the requirements for benchmark setting come from both federal regulation and state regulation. So under federal regulation, we have to set a 4-year target for condition for pavements and bridges only, and then we have a 2-year check-in point. So they ask us to go out in the future 4 years, and then 2 years in, they check to see, are you on progress with where you thought you would be? Now, this is really convenient because 4 years happens to be the cycle of a shop. So you can look at programmed work. Everything is committed to. It's already been approved by the commission. It's very solid, relatively solid. The commission is asking us to do benchmarks over a 10-year period of time. So when we look at going over a 10-year period of time, we have the adopted shop that represents 4 years, and then there's 6 years worth of projects the commission's never seen. And as you go further out in time, the uncertainty related to when these projects get delivered, the exact scope of the project, at least 4 of those 10 years won't even have gone into formal planning yet. So you have no planning documents, you have a concept, and we're, in effect being asked to say, what exactly are we getting from that project that we're going to do 9 years from now? That's a challenge, and it's fraught with a lot of potential changes that lead to uncertainty and analysis. But for the commission, each year for a 10-year period of the TAMP, primary asset classes, entire state highway system inventory, federal, just pavement and bridge for the national highway system, which has its own challenges because there we're looking at what the cities and counties are doing on locally owned pavements and bridges. So, simple 4-step process to develop benchmarks. Start with the best possible condition you have. Reduce that condition by ongoing deterioration on an annual basis. On an annual basis, accumulate project accomplishments. That helps you, so it counteracts the deterioration. And then incorporate new inventory. And the new inventory piece has different effects depending on the inventory. For TMS elements, there's a fairly healthy growth in the inventory as Bruce was alluding to, the automation of the highway experience. There's more, we're trying to squeeze out more operational performance, and so the TMS inventory is growing. When it grows, it's generally brand new because it never existed before. So you're, in effect, dumping the new inventory into a good condition, which dilutes the overall percentage that's in poor, in effect, without doing anything. So in that case, in TMS, new inventory helps you. In culverts, it's the exact opposite because you're doing work to get rid of poor culverts, and the inventory is bringing in culverts that may have been in service for 50, 60 years. Approximately 11-12% of those culverts are in poor condition when you bring them in. So that sort of counters your your project level accomplishments. So the new inventory is tricky, and it has different effects depending on whether it's coming in new or old. But that's the 4-step process. Of these 4 steps, 1, 2, and 4 are relatively straightforward. 3 has been the most challenging part of this whole benchmark setting effort. Identifying what it is that the projects accomplish. Okay, and I'll show you why that's so difficult. So this is a conceptual presentation of a 10-year window of time, which corresponds to the time period that the commission's asked us to develop benchmarks for. So when we look at projects, and there's 5 fictitious projects shown there, they have a point where they are awarded to a contractor, And depending on the size and complexity of that project, there's a time duration, and then the project will close out. Generally speaking, the public will start realizing driving on the new pavement, driving on the new bridge, long before the project closes out. One example I could give you is the Bay Bridge. So we've been driving on the Bay Bridge for 3 years. It hasn't closed out yet. So when you want to recognize the benefit of your project, becomes a very critical decision. If you recognize the benefit of your project at the time you award the contract, then you're going to show projected accomplishment sooner. If you wait to project closeout, that same level of accomplishment will be realized, but it'll be pushed out in time, whatever the working days of the contract was. So what that means is when we're looking at benchmarks over a period of 2017 to 2027, many of the projects that are actually going to be reflected in performance were started long before that. So they're the top 3 projects. Maybe we started them 2010, 2009, 2011, 12, whatever. If their project duration is long enough, the performance gets realized within this window of time. So older projects matter is the point. And so we're in the process of implementing asset management, and to do these benchmarks, we're being asked to go backwards in time and look at projects that the commission approved in prior shops and look at what performance are we getting from those projects. To do a 10-year analysis, we have to look at approximately 15 years worth of projects. We have to be able, on a project-by-project basis, quantify what we're getting when the project is done. Okay, so that sounds like something you just assign a bunch of people and you go do it. But it's actually more complicated than that, because not every project improves the condition. We do projects like painting bridges. So we go paint a bridge. We're painting the bridge to prevent the steel girders from corroding, requiring rehabilitation, but the painting itself doesn't improve the condition of the bridge. So while you're spending money preserving, and that's an important aspect of an asset management approach, you're not realizing any gain in terms of moving fair or poor higher. Okay, so every project has to be looked at not only for the timing of the project, but what exactly is the nature of the work of the project. This is an extremely labor-intensive effort. And without question, the entire department has been mobilized for weeks working on this to try to meet the commission's benchmark deadline of the March meeting. We literally have thousands of labor hours being expended in this effort. Likewise, though, there's projects like this lower one where we're going to start it within the 10-year period. It'll be given to a contractor. In this example, 2024, the time frame of the project is such that it won't close out until well beyond the 2027 time period. So, do you take credit for that project at the time it awarded? Do you wait until it closes out? Do you look at some point in between? That question of when you model the improvement is probably the most critical question in this whole benchmark setting exercise. So it's very important for the commission to understand older projects are going to be reflected early on, and a lot of the new projects that we're doing now that's at double the funding level are going to get awarded later on in this cycle, and in some cases, some of them push out the back end for completion. And that's just a fact of the timing that is the development, design, award, and construction of projects. So what does that mean in terms of shops? So we have had discussions with commission staff about these points in time that are possible to pick in terms of when you're going to take credit. And so the commission staff would like us to look at a point where the public could be realizing the benefit of the project. In other words, if the Bay Bridge is being driven on for 3 years, then we probably should have taken credit for the work or the performance of the Bay Bridge, even though the project didn't close out yet. So trying to find what is that right point in time. And it matters. It matters a lot, because picking different points in time pushes your performance in or out in your time horizon. And what we push out in the back end is at double the funding level of what we're bringing in from legacy projects that are coming in the front end. So they're not equal. Once we, normalize to SB1 funding level, what's coming in from older projects and what's going out would theoretically offset each other more or less. But right now that's not the case, because the funding level was half of what it is going forward. So when you break this down to shops, what we see is, for example, in the current year, the bulk of the performance that we're going to realize is coming from the 2014 shop. We have some from the 2012 shop, and we've got some from the 2016 shop, and a little bit even coming from the 2010 or earlier. So what you're going to measure in the benchmarks is something that you put in motion years before. And it's really important that is understood, because that is all at half the funding level that we have in a post-SB1 world. So when you look at the 2018 shop, for example, the lion's share of the performance gets realized here if we target this point in time when the public would be experiencing those gains. If we made the decision to recognize these benefits at the time we gave it to a contractor and it was under construction, you could take this performance and probably push it up 2 or 3 years. So it's significant. This decision of when you model the improved condition is a very critical question. So in addition to that, there's uncertainties associated with the inventory. We have inventoried a little more than half the culverts in California. We project that there's another 45% still to have, but we don't know that for a fact. And we can't say for certain until we actually go inventory them all. So there's uncertainty associated with the inventory itself. The measured condition, we're assuming condition for those culverts that we have never inventoried. So there's risk there. We are applying deterioration rates to all of these calculations that we believe are the best that we have today. They may prove to be slightly off. If they're slightly off, we start compounding them through time. By the time we get to year 10, you could be slightly off in year 1. By year 10, that has a big impact. And then project accomplishments. So, we're looking over a 10-year set of projects, many of which haven't even started formal planning, where we have our best guess at what we're going to get from the accomplishments of those projects. But until those projects go through the planning process, they come before the commission agrees to fund the projects. Anywhere along that process, the accomplishments could change. And if the accomplishments change, then you've built in more uncertainty. So I'm concerned about this uncertainty because there's this perception that you're going to make a benchmark for the next 10 years and it's going to be good for 10 years. And I'm strongly recommending, and you'll see in my final slide, that these benchmarks be reevaluated on a fairly regular basis. In the meantime, we will be using a technique called the Monte Carlo simulation to build in these potential uncertainties. And what the Monte Carlo simulation will do will give you, your most probable with a range high and low of what you might get. And so it might look something like this, with the red line being, our projection of where we think we would be, but banded high and low with these uncertainties that, if we got to a point in time and we were at a point that was a little bit low or a little bit high, that would be within our expectation of reasonableness. So in summary, I think the methodology is very straightforward. It's 4 simple steps. The challenge is really all in looking at when you take credit for the work, when the performance gets reported as being realized. Certainly all of these are a function of starting condition, deterioration, and then what our projects will accomplish. The further we get out in time, these uncertainties will splay out, so your band gets wider and wider as you go through time. So, when I look at it, comparing, say, what the federal government requires at a 4-year interval, that's pretty solid. What the commission's asking for at a 10-year interval introduces a whole nother level of uncertainty that I don't have in a federal world. So because of that, I will be recommending in my book item related to this, when we present the benchmarks, that we update the benchmarks with every shop, so that every 2 years when we produce a shop, we'll apply the latest condition, we'll apply our latest knowledge of deterioration and inventory and everything else, and we'll give you our best projection at the time. Now, these are all forward-looking projections. The department will also measure the system condition, and we measure the system condition through pavement surveys or bridge inspections or culvert inspections. Those are called lagging measures. So in order to realize the benefit, say from a pavement survey, we put the project out, it gets built, it gets open, and then there's a time period that it takes for the van to drive over that new pavement, process all that data, and then get that realized. So there's anywhere from 12 to 18 months that from the time a construction is completed before you might even realize that it got completed in measured condition. So you're going to have a projection and you're going to have measured, and the measured will always lag the projection in time. So that's really what we've been doing to try to get to this point where we can give the commission, a roadmap of what this looks like. And with that, I'll answer any questions that you might have.
Questions for Michael Johnson? Questions from the commission for Michael Johnson?
I'll just make a comment. I think, the Senate Bill 1, which we're very sensitive to, I certainly am, and taxpayers, people using the system, they're going to want to see results from this stuff. They're going to want to see it when it's completed. Mm-hmm. They don't really care about the problems that happen en route. I know those are real-world things, from as-builts not being as they're supposed to be, or projects not going the right way, or environmental, or the list is lengthy, sure, obviously. But at the end of the day, from my perspective, and I think what the public is looking for, is they just want to see this stuff done. Yep. And they're not going to really feel the state ought to be able to check any box until it's completed. I mean, that seems to be the big thing that I think is important. And I love the idea in the prior discussion on coming up with an inventory and tracking system to where, there's almost so many, as we see in so many cogs, where there's real-time dashboards on project delivery and those types of things. It would be great, as I look through that shop book, that you see all these recommended projects, to eventually those things get added to a dashboard to where commissioners, public, Caltrans, members of the legislature could actually see what's going on in their districts or what's going on in their neighborhood or their communities, and how is Caltrans progressing, and how are you grading yourself to getting this stuff done. Again, I get back to the biggest issue that causes probably the largest complaints on Caltrans and frankly the whole transportation system in general is when things don't get completed as quickly as they should. They end up costing more than they should. There's overruns that we didn't expect, and those are the things. I know you guys all live in this, but it's tough being on the commission when you hear these complaints and you get this all the time, and they say, why can't they do better? And so perhaps having that dashboard and that monitoring system might be a step in the right direction.
And we are working towards that. There's quite a few hurdles just to get the approval, and then at some point we're going to have to look to how to fund this thing. And in my mind, although we've never done this before, I would draw the analogy to, say, a mutual fund. You know, we're managing billions of dollars of investment a year, and I think that it would not be irresponsible to use some portion of that to better manage. And I think that's a dialogue that maybe we'll have to have offline at some later point. We're too early on in the process from our end to really have very meaningful things to talk about, but we are planning to invite private vendors to come in over a series of a day and present what they could offer the state relative to these high-level requirements that we've already drafted. And so I think, you know, seeing what's out there and seeing what they could offer us will, I think, open our eyes even wider to the possibilities.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. I do think the private sector has got a lot of, no sense in the state reinventing the wheel.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things out there that can be, as technology continues to improve, the price goes down. It's a matter of the old adage, garbage in, garbage out. We want to make sure that what the districts are putting in and what's happening at the local level is accurate information. But I appreciate your interest in moving in that direction, and I'd be interested in hearing more about that as we move forward.
Great.
Any other questions from the public? Michael, I just want to make sure we give you empathy for that the world has changed over the last 6 years, and with the MAP 21 in 2012, with Senate Bill 46 in 2014, and now SB 1. Those have drawn our relationship between the Commission and Caltrans together pretty to where we're now partners on the shop. Our relationship was different prior to 2012. So, having said that, I think we want to make sure that as we move forward, we recognize that our relationship is different. Do we need, as a commission, need to be interfacing on these shop projects? Are we being a timely partner? I want to make sure we're a timely partner in this, because time is the enemy of support costs. As I look at it, and there's not a summary page, so it's very hard for me to put this together. But out of the $18 billion that are in this book, it looks like $4 to $5 billion is in support cost, maybe a little less. But time is the enemy of support cost. The longer project takes time, start, stop, support costs grow. I think one of the things I would not like to be is, because in this, also in SB 1, every step along the way comes back to the Commission for funding and review. Okay. So how do we keep projects moving quickly and efficiently, keeping the Commission involved? And this may be a question for all of the Caltrans people who are here.
It is.
And be an effective partner to you, so that we're not the cause of a project starting, stopping, while still having our role in accountability to say, hey, let's pump the brakes on this portion of it.
It's a good question, and it's one that between Jim and myself and Bruce and Stephen and Chris in our planning group, we meet weekly and we talk about these things and we coordinate, and we're looking across all divisions within the department how to do things better, in some cases different. So one example I can give you that's very concrete is we talked about having a 10-year set of projects. We've never had a 10-year set of projects ever. And so we can look at that now. Jim can take that and look at resources, what the resource needs are going to be, where they're going to be needed. Construction folks can look at that for that same reason. Chris can look at it from a planning perspective. Stephen can get an idea of what's coming down the pipe budgetarily. But almost more importantly, to your point, a lot of the starts and stops that we have come from new things being identified as a project goes through its development. Whether it's planning, design, there's things that come up in the environmental process. When we go out with stakeholders, there's sometimes new scope that gets put into the mix. When those things happen, they oftentimes have schedule and cost implications, and that will cause us to have to go back to the Commission. So part of the idea of getting this 10-year set of work out there is, and there's actually narrative in this set of projects, to get our stakeholders focused on the right point in time to have those discussions. The right point in time to have a discussion about some scope that you wanted isn't when the draft shop comes out. It was long before that. And so, the book, this project book that I'm referring to, helps educate a little bit our stakeholders, whether it's the public or an MPO or RTPA, city, county, whatever it is. It points them to the right points in time to be looking at where their concerns, their issues can be brought forward with the least possible project delay. And I think innovative approaches like that, then that's just one example. Jim's got 15 going in project delivery, and there's others that we're trying to be as efficient. We got to get a lot of work out with SB1, and we're literally looking at whole new ways of doing business to get that done. Whether it's different means of contracting, and things like this book where we can maybe stave some of the late changes from coming. So it's a whole spectrum of different strategies that, fall in at least the five, between Bruce, Jim, and Stephen and Chris, between the five of us that are in one bucket or the other, and we're meeting, on a regular basis to coordinate all this and make sure that, what we're doing is in sync as we move this thing forward. So there are a lot of moving parts. It's been exciting. It's been challenging. We're trying to do the best we can, and I think we're doing a pretty decent job for what we have at stake.
Okay, I'm trying to come back to so what you're saying is for us to be an effective partner to, and Jim and Bruce, if you want to jump in here, you feel free to do so. For us to be an effective partner to you, you said, because I'll be honest with you, I get this book, it's somewhat daunting.
Yeah.
I basically say, boy, Rick and Steve, I hope you're going through this thing pretty with a fine-tooth comb, because it's very hard for me as a commissioner to say this project in Los Angeles is the support cost is correct or it's not correct. So it's very hard for me to be micro on this booklet. I'm not even sure how well we're doing as being macro. So that's what I'm trying to get to is how do we help you? Because I know you have goals of having the right level of support costs. You guys have goals of bringing $100 million in annual savings, and we're trying to figure out how do we make sure that's happening so we can do our fiduciary duty to the public and to the legislature, but also how can we be an effective partner in that?
Well, I was, and I'll open it up to Jim and Bruce, but I was really encouraged by the project delivery workshop. I think education is part of the solution because, I think from our end, we have people that are very good at their job, trying very hard, and I think sometimes, to have the commission, and really what I've been trying to do today is give you a little insight into what it takes to do these things so that when we come before you, it's not empathy we're looking for, it's just transparency and the realization that there are a lot of challenges that we have. And so more opportunity like that workshop I think would be very positive. It's hard to get some of these concepts across in a 10-minute agenda item in a commission meeting. Like this presentation, the discussion we're having here today, you can't have that in a commission meeting. So I think those are very positive. And I don't know, Bruce, if you want to add anything.
The point is that 6 years ago, when you were doing the shop, the commission didn't have checkpoints that you had to come to and have a say yes. I think it would be very, it's going to be, I think we're all going to be grumpy if it's viewed, if that process where we now, I think there's about 8 different times where the commission has checkpoints to say yes or no to things. Now, some of those are going to be grouped together, so it's
Sure.
not like you're going to come 8 times. But in the chart that was presented during project delivery, there's different times now under SB1 that's very different than pre Senate Bill 486. I want to make sure our relationship between the commission and Caltrans is one where we're encouraging each other, not one where, as a Caltrans worker, you walk away and say, man, those guys on the commission are jerks. Because
They say that anyway.
They do, but
all good.
I want to make sure that how we go forward over the next 10 years, it's not just constant headbutting, but we're working together and we're being an effective partner to you and making you better, and you're making us better.
But believe me, Commissioner, there's no one that would like that more than those ones standing here. So
help us help
Yeah.
you.
So if I
Sure.
could, Bruce DeTerra with programming. So I want to take advantage of your question to respond that some of the practices we've been implementing in cooperation with commission staff, for example, like Jim Davis's quarterly updates on the status reports on the projects, of identifying where projects are and where projects are getting into trouble or we think they're going to get into trouble, communicating that early and working with your staff to address problems early on and keep you up to date so that we don't have these lag periods that is, like Mike was saying, as it builds up over time, things get worse and worse and the costs go up. So Jim is working very hard with his folks in the districts to get that information to us, and then we're trying to reflect that in the information we share with you to have this. Now, we meet regularly with all of our district teams, and perhaps we can expand our, you've increased your commission staff. It used to be just poor Stephen when he was solo having to deal with this monster of all the people we have here, but you've got more staff we can interact with now. Rick brings tremendous expertise. More expertise is now on the staff so that we have the opportunity to work on these projects early on if we're going to have issues.
And Commissioner, one of the things that really is key to all of us is estimating practices. And Jim Davis and I are really going through the processes of how we can improve the estimating practices by having not only estimates that are looking backwards, but actually getting estimates that are looking forwards. The department is in the process of actually acquiring some economists and others that can help them with looking forward into the market forces. So we are working on this stuff.
Okay.
And one of the things that are guiding us, and we say it to ourselves and our teams, no surprises to you. So we shouldn't be coming to you at a commission meeting where you're put in that position, like, whoa, there are things that happen that are unexpected that we didn't anticipate, but you shouldn't be surprised by these developments so that we can be working towards solutions before they become a crisis and add a lot of time.
Well, I think another, there's many projects in here that are, a safety project where the direct construction, the direct right-of-way cost may be $2 million. But the support cost is like $3 million. And a lot of the safety projects like that. Maybe the commission having a better understanding of why, it's easy when you're doing an ox lane and construction is 10 and support is 2 to say, okay, that seems about a right ratio. Mm-hmm. When you see that ratio of support to construction be different, you start to say, okay, how is this working we're trying to get our arms around understanding that, because that's certainly been a discussion that has been on the commission since I've been on of, hey, how do we measure whether this is the correct support cost? How do we measure? We talked about it in the project delivery. Right. How do we have the true cost of what environmental is? We say, our environmental document was $300,000. Yeah, but that process of going through it changed the project construction from $9 million to $28 million because some agency said, hey, we want you to do this differently. So we're trying to get somewhat transparency, and it's hard when you're doing a summary of 1,000 projects.
Yes.
Very difficult. I affirm that. So, but as being your partner, we're trying to get our arms around how to help you.
And going back to Mike's, before I hand it to Jim, the reference to the workshop we had at the last meeting, we found that to be tremendously valuable.
I did as well.
To have that conversation. That was fabulous. And I think we have more of those, and we dig into these things and really have deep dialogues and understanding Not just that, like we're telling you what we do, but we're hearing of your needs and we're responding and adjusting our processes to reflect your needs. You have on our side, Mike mentioned five people. We have a lot of other people that are actively engaged, and we are all in on making SB1 successful and making this relationship work well. So we've got growing pains together as we learn how to implement all this. But we have the same goal at the end, to deliver a very good transportation system for California. So let me hand it off to
Jim.
Thank you, Commissioner. Jim Davis, Capital Outlay Support Program Manager at Caltrans. And one of the things you mentioned earlier is about time. And time is something that we're very focused on, how to try and reduce the time it takes to get to construction and reduce the number of construction seasons, because the support cost is related to that. We do have a direct relationship between the size of our projects and costs. Smaller projects cost more. The one thing that we're seeing with asset management and with the new thinking at Caltrans is by giving targets to the districts and giving them the dollars, what we're seeing is the districts are optimizing the use of those dollars and maximizing the benefits or assets that are coming out of that. And what we've looked at our 10-year book is we're starting to see about a 40% cost increase in the size of projects. So we're getting bigger projects, more corridor, more integrated approach, and there's an economy of scale. And with that economy of scale means we're spending less support dollars to produce the capital dollars. We're always going to have small projects that have a small outcome that needs to occur. But I think as a shop in totality, we're going to be seeing much greater efficiency with our support by having these more corridor type projects. Just for the facts right now about 80% of our projects are under $5 million. And they represent somewhere around 35% of the total dollars. Conversely, I got 20% of our projects that represent somewhere around 65% of the dollars. And so it's not quite Pareto, but you start to see that where small projects are less cost effective and bigger projects are more cost effective. And so I think some of the things that we're doing with the implementation of Senate Bill 46 and Senate Bill 1 and moving towards asset management and really delegating to the districts the authority, responsibility, and accountability to come up with the projects versus being driven by a headquarters tops-down silo management is really going to pay off for us. And so I see a lot of positive aspects of that.
Okay. Any other questions? Anything else, Jim?
No. I just like the project delivery workshop that we had. I thought was very productive. It'd be great at some point, like you said, you don't have enough time at a commission meeting. I'd have no problem following a commission meeting, having this dialogue with those commissioners. Because again, at the end of the day, it's important to all of us, just as it is to you. We get to hear Senator Bell, we hear Assemblymember Frazier talking about these issues, and frankly, the commission and the administration are wanting to see these things happen as quickly as possible too. There's a lot at stake here.
And Commissioner, we are planning on more of those workshops. Next time we're going to be probably doing a very deep dive into the environmental and permitting processes.
Okay, looks like we have a question from the audience. Public comment, okay. Is this person next? Okay, come on up so we can see you on the screen.
Here?
Do you mind standing right there? It's easier for the camera to see you. Thank you. Esther Postiglione?
Postiglione.
Okay, forgive me.
Good morning, Esther Postiglione. I'm here on behalf of California Walks. I just wanted to provide a comment and also ask a couple of questions. So California Walks is very interested in seeing more walkable and bikeable communities and making sure that complete streets are implemented. Michael Johnson has been great in meeting with us and talking to us a little bit about the TAMP. And my question is more so related to the SHSMP and that there was a baseline set that from the 2016 projects, there would be a 20% increase in 2018 SHOP projects that incorporate features of complete streets. So I just wanted to check in if there was an update on what that baseline was from 2016. And if there has been a 20% increase in those features for 2018 SHOP projects. Thank you.
Who would like to tackle that?
I think that's probably a Bruce question or a Michael Johnson question.
Good question. So one of the many objectives that we have to try to look at when we put the shop together is our balance between highway transportation, transit, bike, ped, and we take that very seriously. One of the slides that I showed earlier showed the performance at a project level that we are now requiring for all our projects. Every project in the 2018 shop has this performance definition, and within that performance definition, the number is over 30 different complete streets activities that our districts can define that they're doing. These run the range from putting in new curb ramps, to adding sidewalks, to building bike lanes, to putting in crosswalks. We did some analysis of the 2018 shop projects. Of those that permit bicycle and pedestrian access, approximately 38% of all projects had some element of complete street. And there's a very detailed breakdown across these 30 some odd different activities that are being accomplished and how much of each one are being accomplished. So we're at 38%. I don't know off the top of my head what the 2016 baseline number was, but I was kind of on the front lines along with Bruce and some of his staff in trying to get the 2016 number. We didn't even have the data to do it. We literally had to go back to all of our districts, have them review every planning document for every project in the 2016 shop and evaluate whether complete streets were done. So, we're in a much better place today. We have the information in a database. It's quantified by quantity, location, information. So the point that Esther brings up is a good one. We are trying to improve in this area as well. We're trying to improve across the board, and I think that's evidence from where we were 2 years ago, where we are now. It's like night and day better. But we're up at 38%, and I think that's a pretty decent percentage of projects that have some element of complete streets in them.
Okay. Anyone else? Any other questions? Anything else? Anything else from staff? I'd like to thank you all for joining us today, whether you are here in the room or watching us on the webcast. As Director Berman comes in, as we close our meeting today, I want to congratulate Lori Berman on her ascension to either congratulations or condolences as you now lead the tribe. Thank you for joining us today. This meeting is adjourned.